Welcome, restless souls, to Carmen's Crypt. I'm Carmen Carrion, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close. The candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carmen's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes to life. This is Carmen's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits. Mason Hart wore his smile like any other boy might wear a baseball cap, something easily put on and taken off at will. The smile never quite reached his eyes, but no one noticed. No one ever noticed much about Mason beyond what he wanted them to see. His parents praised his good grades and polite manners. Teachers commented on his attentiveness in class. Neighbors remarked on what a helpful young man he was becoming. At 14, Mason had perfected the art of blending in. He knew exactly when to laugh at jokes, when to show concern, when to offer help. He had studied human emotions the way other kids study video games, with intense focus and dedication. Not because he felt them, but because he needed to mimic them convincingly. Inside, Mason felt nothing. No remorse, no empathy, no sympathy. Just an endless, hollow void where those feelings should have been. And somewhere in that void lived a hunger, a craving to inflict pain, to witness suffering, to hold power over life itself. He understood consequences, though. Mason was smart, exceptionally so, and he knew what would happen if anyone ever discovered his true nature. So he found other outlets for his desires. You know, speaking of Mason's calculated, methodical approach to everything he does, that got me thinking about focus. And not with the twisted kind Mason has, but the kind we actually need to get through our daily lives. We've all been there. You sit down to work on something important, maybe editing a podcast episode about a psychopathic teenager, and suddenly your brain feels like it's swimming through fog. You can't force focus, no matter how many productivity hacks you try. But what you can do is control how you regulate your energy. That's actually how I ended up working with today's sponsor, Magic Mind. They reached out a few weeks ago and said, "Hey, try these energy shots. They're designed for focus without the jitters." And honestly, I was skeptical. But they sent me samples of all 3 of their formulations to test first, before we even talked about sponsoring the show. After trying them for 6 days, I knew I had to tell you about them. So here's what happened. I tested each of their 3 shots for 2 days each, and it was fascinating to learn what type of energy actually works for my brain. Days 1 and 2, I started with Max. This one has the dark green cap and says Max right on the label. This is their highest caffeine option with 165 milligrams. But here's the thing, it doesn't hit you like a truck the way regular energy drinks do. It's time released, so it gives you steady energy over 3 to 4 hours, instead of that awful spike and crash cycle. I was working on research for this episode, diving deep into the psychology behind cases like Mason's, and I honestly lost track of time in the best way. Usually I'm checking my phone every 10 minutes, but I was just locked in for hours. Days 3 and 4, I tried Free. This one has the light green cap and says Free on the label. 0 caffeine, 0 sugar, but still all the nootropics and adaptogens. This was weird in a good way. I felt like my brain was running cleaner, if that makes sense. Way less scattered thoughts bouncing around. Perfect for those late night recording sessions when I need to be sharp but don't want to be bouncing off the walls at midnight. Days 5 and 6, the original. This one says original on the gradient label. This is their balanced formula with moderate caffeine. I was doing editing work, and it felt like I found that sweet spot where you're alert but not jittery. Like having really good coffee but without the crash where you suddenly feel like garbage 2 hours later. For me, Max became my go-to, and here's why. My biggest problem is getting distracted. I'll sit down to work on a script and suddenly I'm 3 hours deep in a Wikipedia rabbit hole about Victorian-era crime statistics or an idea for my next story. Max keeps me locked in on what I'm actually supposed to be doing. It's like having tunnel vision, but in the best way possible. The science behind it is the nano-encapsulation technology. Basically, your body absorbs way more of the actual nutrients instead of losing half of them in your digestive system. It's like turbocharged absorption. Now, I tested the other formulas on some friends too. My sister tried Max and said it was too much for her. She already drinks way too much coffee during the day. She preferred the original for that balanced energy. And my best friend who gets anxiety from caffeine absolutely loved the free version of those clear-headed, productive days without any jitters. Here's the thing. Magic Mind just launched these new formulations, and they're offering 60% off your first subscription. That's honestly insane. It's their biggest discount ever. You can get it with the link in our show notes or the code Carmen60. Plus, they have a 100% money-back guarantee. If you don't like it, they'll refund everything. No questions asked. You can cancel the subscription anytime. Basically, you're trying it for free. This launch offer won't be around long, so if you've got deadlines, projects, or just want to stop the doom scrolling and actually get stuff done, grab it while you can. Now, speaking of focus and calculated behavior, let's get back to Mason Hart and his methodical approach to finding the perfect disposal site. The first had been a neighbor's cat when he was 11, a sleek Siamese named Milo that used to watch him through half-lidded eyes from the Johnsons' porch. Mason had spent weeks earning its trust. Gentle words, scraps of tuna, patient fingers extended in false friendship. When Milo finally allowed himself to be picked up, purring against Mason's chest, the boy had felt nothing but cold calculation. He had taken the cat to his special place in the woods, a small clearing he had prepared with plastic sheeting spread carefully over fallen leaves. Mason had brought his father's fishing knife, stolen from the garage that morning, its blade gleaming in dappled sunlight. The cat had sensed something then, tried to escape, claws raking across Mason's forearm. What followed was not quick, not clean. Mason had wanted to understand death, to witness the transition from life to stillness. He had watched with clinical fascination as terror filled the animal's eyes, as its struggles weakened, as the light behind those blue eyes gradually dimmed to nothing. Blood had soaked the plastic, surprisingly warm against his skin, its coppery scent filling his nostrils. When it was over, Mason sat cross-legged beside the small corpse for nearly an hour, studying the stillness, the transition complete. He felt no remorse, no disgust, only a thundering exhilaration unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was power in its purest form, and it awakened something primal within him. The rush had been intoxicating, the control, the power, the intimate dance with death. He had taken photographs with a disposable camera, images he later studied in the privacy of his bedroom, reliving the moment again and again. Then came other neighborhood pets, more cats, a few small dogs, whatever he could lure away without raising suspicion, each killing more elaborate than the last, each giving him new insights into his craft. He kept trophies sometimes, a collar, a tuft of fur, a single claw, hidden in a shoebox beneath his bed. Initially, he'd hidden their bodies in the abandoned Millbrook house at the edge of the development. The decrepit Victorian with its sagging porch and boarded windows had provided the perfect hideaway, its basement a sanctuary for his growing collection. But 3 months ago, a group of kids looking for a place to smoke had discovered his trophies. The police investigated. Neighbors grew suspicious. Parents became overprotective of their pets. Mason had been careful, leaving no evidence linking him to the animals. Still, he needed a new disposal site. The pressure had built inside him for weeks with no release, his fantasies growing more elaborate, more human. That's when he found the well. It was nearly 2 miles into Harker Woods, far beyond where most people ventured. Mason had been exploring deeper into the forest, seeking solitude when he spotted it. Stones rising from the undergrowth in a nearly perfect circle, moss-covered and crumbling. The well seemed forgotten by time itself. No trail led to it. No signs indicated its presence. It was as if the forest had grown around it, deliberately hiding it from the world. When Mason peered down into its depths, he saw nothing but impenetrable darkness. He dropped a stone, counting seconds until a distant splash confirmed its considerable depth. The sound echoed back like a whisper. Perfect. 2 days later, he returned with the Johnson family's terrier, Pepper, still warm in his backpack. Standing at the well's edge, Mason felt a peculiar sensation, a coldness that seemed to rise from the stonework itself, creeping up his legs despite the warm June air. He dismissed it as excitement as he emptied his backpack, watching with satisfaction as the small white body disappeared into the darkness. This time, he didn't hear a splash. As he turned to leave, a whisper seemed to rise from the well, so faint he almost believed he'd imagined it. Almost. "Thank you." Mason froze, then laughed at himself. The wind in the trees, nothing more. Over the following weeks, Mason returned to the well 5 more times. With each visit, his confidence grew, as did his boldness. He began taking greater risks, targeting more beloved pets, savoring the neighborhood's growing distress. The local paper ran stories about the mysterious disappearances. Parents kept their children close. Mason watched it all with detached amusement, a director appreciating his own production. But something was changing at the well. Each time he returned, Mason found the surrounding area slightly different. What had once been a charming clearing dotted with wildflowers was slowly changing. The flowers were dying, their petals brown and curled, stems blackened as if touched by frost. The undergrowth was receding, creating a widening circle of bare earth around the stone structure. Even the grass looked sickly, yellowed and sparse. The trees appeared to lean away from the clearing, as if reluctant to cast their shadows upon it. And there was something else, a feeling of being watched, not by human eyes, but by something more primal, more patient. On his 6th visit, as he dropped a neighbor's prize rabbit down the well, Mason heard something different. Ravenous grunts, accompanied by the ripping and tearing of flesh. The sounds were coming from deep within the well. Mason froze, heart racing, staring down into the impenetrable darkness. The forest seemed unnaturally still, not even a breeze stirring the leaves. "What the hell?" he whispered, his voice trembling. The feeding sounds continued. Wet, satisfied noises, followed by what sounded unmistakably like bones being cracked and marrow being sucked out. The sounds echoed from the darkness with a hollow, hungry resonance that made Mason's skin crawl. Mason approached the well cautiously, peering down into its depths. Still, nothing but darkness, yet it seemed somehow different, less empty, more aware. He could feel it studying him as intently as he studied it. He left quickly that day, and for the first time since he could remember, Mason felt uneasy. That night he dreamed of the well. In his dream, he stood at its edge, looking down, but instead of darkness, he saw a pile of decaying animals reaching almost to the top. At the bottom, partially buried beneath the grisly mound, lay something larger, human-shaped, but twisted, its skin the color of mushrooms that grow in darkness. As he watched, the figure began to move, to climb, using the bodies as a ladder, coming closer and closer to the surface. Mason woke drenched in sweat, his heart hammering against his ribs. The dream had been so vivid he could still smell the decay, a sweet, sickly scent that seemed to cling to his nostrils. He told himself it was just a nightmare, the product of an overactive imagination. But deep down, in the void where his emotions should have been, something shifted uncomfortably. For 3 days he stayed away from the well. The urges continued to build, but now they mingled with an unfamiliar sensation, something almost like fear. Almost. On the 4th day, curiosity overcame caution. He told himself he needed to prove the well was just a well, nothing more. This time he went empty-handed. The forest seemed different as he made his way along the now familiar path. Sounds were muted, colors less vibrant. Even the air felt thicker, harder to breathe. When he reached the clearing, Mason stopped abruptly. The transformation was complete. Where wildflowers had once bloomed, only bare, blackened earth remained. The circle of death had expanded, reaching nearly to the tree line. In the poisoned soil, a ring of pale mushrooms had sprouted, their caps glistening with moisture that shouldn't have been there given the recent drought. The stones of the well itself had changed too. They looked newer somehow, the moss gone, the mortar between them fresh and dark. Most disturbing of all was the smell, that same sweet, sickly scent from his dream, wafting from the well's mouth like breath from a living thing. Mason approached cautiously. He should leave, he knew that, but something compelled him forward, a morbid fascination he couldn't resist. Standing at the edge, he peered down into the darkness. "Hello?" he called, surprising himself. He never spoke to the well. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, carried on a cold updraft that ruffled his hair, came the voice, no longer a whisper, but clear and surprisingly gentle. "Hello, Mason. I've been waiting for you to come back." Ice flooded his veins. "How do you know my name?" he demanded, backing away from the edge. A sound rose from the well, something between a chuckle and a sigh. "I know many things about you, Mason. I know what you do to the animals. I know the emptiness inside you. I know your hunger." A pause. "We're very much alike, you and I." Despite his fear, Mason felt a spark of interest. "What are you?" "Once I was like you, a boy with a void inside. My name was Elias." The voice grew softer, almost wistful. "That was in 1887, before they caught me, before they threw me down here." Mason's mind raced, processing this information. "You've been down there for over 100 years? Time moves differently here," said Elias. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday. Sometimes it feels like forever." Another pause. "I wasn't as careful as you, Mason. I didn't understand the consequences. What did you do? Mason asked, unable to keep the fascination from his voice. I started with animals too, Elias replied. But animals can only satisfy for so long. The implication hung in the air between them. Mason swallowed hard, both repelled and intrigued. Deep inside, in that void where normal boys kept their conscience, a dark excitement bloomed. Elias had crossed the line Mason had only fantasized about. He had taken human life, felt human blood on his hands, watched the light fade from human eyes. They found the bodies, Elias continued. 6 of them. They didn't give me a trial, just dragged me here to this old well on the family's property and threw me in, left me to die slowly in the dark. His voice hardened, but I didn't die. Not completely. Something down here kept me alive, after a fashion. Something that recognized what I was. And what's that? Mason whispered. Special. Chosen. Free from the weaknesses that plague others. Elias's voice grew more animated. For years I existed in darkness, feeding on what small creatures fell or wandered in. Then you found me, Mason. You brought me gifts. You made me stronger. Mason felt dizzy, the implication spinning through his mind. The animals I threw in? Sustained me, renewed me. A wet slithering sound came from the well. I'm nearly ready now, nearly strong enough to leave this prison. Leave? Mason repeated, taking another step back. How? I need one more gift, Mason. A special one. The voice was honeyed, seductive. I need innocence, Mason. Pure, untainted innocence. The kind that can only come from someone who has never known cruelty, never felt malice. A child. Mason felt a chill that had nothing to do with the supernatural. A child? Their life force is different, Elias explained, his voice taking on an almost scholarly tone. Unmarked by darkness that taints us, it's the perfect counterbalance to what I've become down here. The union of pure innocence with pure corruption. It will give me the power to break free. Why would I want to do that? Mason asked, more to buy time than out of any moral objection. Because I can offer you something in return. Knowledge, power, freedom from consequence. Elias's voice dropped to an intimate whisper. I've learned secrets down here, Mason. The darkness has taught me things. I can teach you how to satisfy your hunger without fear of discovery, how to indulge your true nature and never be caught. It was tempting, so tempting. For years, Mason had restrained himself, limited his activities to animals, always aware of the constraints society placed upon him. The thought of freedom from those constraints was intoxicating. How do I know you're telling the truth? He challenged. A laugh echoed from the depths. You don't. That's the beauty of it. You'll have to trust me, or rather, trust your curiosity. Don't you want to see what happens? Isn't that why you do what you do? To see what happens? He was right. At the core of Mason's being was an insatiable curiosity about pain, about death, about the fragility of life. The opportunity to explore those interests without constraint was worth almost any risk. I'll think about it, Mason said finally. Don't take too long, Elias warned. The moon will be full in 3 nights. That's when the barrier between my world and yours is thinnest. That's when I can emerge, with the right sacrifice. Mason left the well that day with his mind churning, torn between excitement and caution. His hands trembled with a strange anticipation, his mouth dry with desire. Part of him, the calculating, survival-oriented part, warned that this was dangerous, unpredictable, but another part, the part that lived in the void, was thrilled by the possibilities. For 2 days, Mason watched the children in his neighborhood. He noted their habits, their routes home, which ones might be easy to lure away. There was one 7-year-old, Emily Johnson, who often played alone in her backyard. There was little Tommy Rodriguez, who liked to explore the edges of the woods behind his house. On the 2nd day, he spotted his opportunity. Emily was playing hopscotch by herself in the park, her mother nowhere in sight. She was small, maybe 6 or 7, with pigtails and a bright yellow dress that made her look like a flower. Pure innocence. Mason approached Emily. It was easier than he'd expected. A few kind words, a story about finding a fairy circle in the woods, and she was following him eagerly, chattering about fairies and magic and whether they might grant wishes. Mason led her deeper into the forest, his heart pounding with anticipation. This was it. This was the moment he'd been building toward. The full moon was rising, casting everything in silver light, and Emily skipped alongside him, trusting and innocent, completely unaware of what awaited her. When they reached the clearing, Emily gasped in delight. The mushroom circle glowed faintly in the moonlight, and the ancient stones of the well looked mysterious and magical. "Is this where the fairies live?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. "Very special fairies," Mason said. "But you have to be very quiet, or you'll scare them away." Emma nodded solemnly and tiptoed toward the well. Mason followed, his hands shaking with excitement. This was it. This was what he had been working toward. But as they approached the well's edge, Emily suddenly stopped. "I smell something funny," she said, wrinkling her nose. The sweet, sickly scent was stronger than ever, and even in the moonlight, Mason could see something pale moving in the depths of the well. Emily took a step back, her innocent instincts finally recognizing danger. "I want to go home," she said, her voice small and frightened. "But we just got here," Mason said, reaching for her arm. "Don't you want to see the fairies?" Emily jerked away from his touch, and in that moment, her child's intuition overcame her trust. She saw something in Mason's face, something hungry and cold and wrong. She screamed. The sound pierced the night air, echoing through the trees. Emily turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, her yellow dress a bright flash in the darkness. Mason started after her, but a voice from the well stopped him. "Let her go." Mason spun around. The voice was different now, not just coming from the well, but from the air around him, from the ground beneath his feet. "She was perfect," Mason protested. "Pure innocence, just like what you wanted. And now she's tainted," Elias said. "Fear has touched her. The moment she recognized the danger, her innocence was lost. She's no use to me now." Mason felt panic rising in his chest. "Then what?" "But you brought me something even better," Elias continued. The voice seemed to be circling him now, coming from different directions. "You brought me yourself, Mason, willingly, eagerly. We had a deal," Mason said, backing toward the trees. "And I'm keeping it. I offered you knowledge, power, freedom from consequence. I never said you'd be free to enjoy them." Something moved in the well. A pale, glistening appendage that might once have been an arm curled over the stone edge. Then another, and another. "You see, Mason, I lied about needing innocence. What I really needed was someone like us. Someone with the void inside. Someone who would come willingly to this place of power. Your darkness will merge with mine, and together we'll be strong enough to leave this prison." The thing that pulled itself from the well was no longer recognizably human. It moved with undulating grace, its flesh pale and translucent, revealing the dark network of veins beneath. What had once been Elias's face had elongated, features sliding into something amphibian, eyes huge and black in the moonlight. Mason ran. He was fast. Years of sports had ensured that. But the thing that followed was faster, moving like liquid that ate up the distance between them. Mason could hear it behind him, the wet slapping of its body against the earth, leaving a glistening trail that gleamed silver in the moonlight. Cold, wet hands closed around his ankle, the flesh unnaturally soft and yielding. The fingers sank into his skin, not just gripping, but somehow adhering to them. Barbed hooks of fungal tissue burrowing beneath his flesh. He screamed then, a high, childlike sound, so unlike his normal controlled voice. The pain was extraordinary as the creature's touch began to dissolve his skin, digestive enzymes breaking down the barrier between them. "No, no, no, we had a deal!" he shrieked, all pretense of calm abandoning him. The creature dragged him back to the well, holding him easily despite his struggles. It lifted him as if he weighed nothing, dangling him over the well's mouth. In the moonlight, Mason could finally see into its depths. Not water, but a writhing mass of pale fungal growth that pulsed and shifted like something alive. "Don't worry," Elias said, his breath cold and damp against Mason's ear. "You won't die, not completely. You'll become a part of something greater, part of me. Your consciousness will join with mine, your memories added to our collection." As Elias lowered him toward the waiting darkness, Mason screamed, not in fear, but in rage. This wasn't fair. This wasn't how things were supposed to be. He was supposed to be the predator, not the prey. The fungal mass reached up to embrace him, and Mason felt his consciousness being pulled apart, dissolved, merged with something vast and ancient and hungry. His last coherent thought was a bitter acknowledgement of irony. He, who had felt nothing for others his entire life, was about to be intimately, eternally connected to something else. The void inside Mason Hart would finally be filled. But the story didn't end there. Mason's body was never found. His parents reported him missing when he failed to come home that night. Search parties combed the woods for weeks, but they never ventured as deep as the ancient well, never found the place where wildflowers had once bloomed, but now only death remained. What they did find, eventually, were more disappearances, not just animals now, but people, mostly children who wandered too far into the woods alone. The thing that had once been Mason Hart, his consciousness now merged with Elias's ancient hunger, had learned to be patient. It would wait in the darkness of the well, calling to the lost and the lonely, drawing them deeper into the forest with whispered promises. And when they came to the edge of the stone circle, when they peered down into that infinite darkness, they would hear a voice, sometimes Mason's, sometimes Elias's, sometimes something that was both and neither. "Hello," the voice would say. "I've been waiting for you." Just a quick reminder before I go. If you want to try Magic Mind and get that 60% off, use code Carmen60 or hit the link in our show notes. That launch discount won't last long. And so, dear listeners, we emerge from another dark corner of Carmen's crypt. But remember, the horrors you've heard tonight are merely echoes of the terrors that await in the shadows of your own mind. If you enjoyed your stay in the crypt, why not invite a friend to join us next week? After all, fear is best when shared. Leave a review if you dare, or share your own tales of terror on my social media. Who knows, your nightmares might just become my next story. Until next time, keep checking under your bed. And remember, in Carmen's crypt, every fear comes alive, and no one is truly safe. Sweet dreams, if you can still sleep at all.